Introduction to Access 2007. In this nugget, we will create a database in Access 2007. We'll use both a wizard and the new command in the Office menu just to get started on a new database file. We'll also open a database that's already been created. And because this is your introduction to Access, we'll take a tour of some of the new features that exist here following the Office 2007 model. There's a ribbon and there's an Office button that are certainly new in the Office world. Before we get started with the tour of Access, let's have a conversation about what Access is made up of. Certainly, it's a database application, and the goal of a database application is to have data. So all of our data is going to be held in our tables. Records and records or rows of data. And with Access, it's a full-blown database application, so you can have many different tables that are related together. And we'll talk about normalizing data with the goal in mind that we want you to be able to create fantastic, solidly structured tables. Well, how do you get that data into the tables? That's where forms come in. In Access, you can create full-blown fields and forms, and they look professional like any form you ever see in an application. And forms are created so that your users don't ever have to get into those tables. Instead, they go into the form and the data gets added into the table. Well, another big piece of databases is being able to pull that information out of your database, out of your tables. So what we do is we construct queries, and these queries will extract information from our tables. We can set up conditions to pull numbers of records because our tables may hold thousands upon thousands of records. We don't want to just scroll through. We create queries which will give us exactly the information that we need. Now, why do we put data into tables? Well, so we can do calculations and so that we can really show information to other people, usually decision makers or people that need to take that information to earn money or understand what needs to be ordered or whatever it is that's the point of your database. So instead of showing people the tables or showing people the queries, instead we build reports off of our queries. And the reports within Access can be designed beautifully, just like any other report that you have ever seen from an application or seen printed out. You can make them with graphics incorporated, your company logo, with calculations, and even with charts. And charts are a very quick way to show with a visual representation the point of your data. So I have this arrow pointing from queries to reports because although we could base our reports off of our tables, more than likely we don't want to extract all that information from a table and throw it into a report. Instead, we take all that criteria that we used in the query, like a date range or a particular product or a particular region for our salespeople, and we build that query and we base our report off of that query so that we really can streamline the information that we're presenting to those decision makers who need to be able to see our data. Forms, tables, queries, and reports are four of the main objects that you'll see within Access. They're all included within the very same file, and there's plenty of tools in here that really will assist you in creating fantastic solutions with your databases. Well, let's go ahead and launch Microsoft Access and get started. Access is like any other program on a Windows operating system. We find it in the Start menu, under All Programs. Here I have a Microsoft Office grouping, and there it is, Microsoft Office Access 2007. We're launched right into the Getting Started with Microsoft Office Access window. From here we have a couple different choices. We could read all about what's new in Access 2007. We could open a database that's already been created, We could go out to Microsoft Office Online and access some templates that are out there, business templates, education, personal, or even some sample databases. But let's launch some local templates. When Access was installed, there were templates that were installed with it. Over the years, Microsoft has discovered what typical types of databases people like to create. And here we see assets, contacts, events, faculty. We can scroll on down. This one right here, Northwind 2007, has been around since Access was first created over 10 years ago. So if any of you are used to using older versions of Access, this is the same database, the same data, and so it may help you be familiar with the new features because you're looking at data that you're familiar with. Not to mention, if you want to practice anyway and you don't have a big, huge database, Northwind is chock full of forms, queries, reports, and tables, and even macros and modules, so you can really see some well-developed objects. We, however, are going to create our own contacts database. I click on the contacts template and now I can make a name. Well, contacts 1 to me seems like a perfectly descriptive name, although you can name it whatever you'd like to name this. As Microsoft products often do, it's telling me it's going to be stored in my Documents folder. Naturally, you could change that by clicking that folder icon and navigating to a different drive that's mapped on your computer or really anywhere that it would make sense. Something new in Microsoft is the idea of SharePoint services. This is a pretty neat feature because it facilitates collaboration among many people. If you have a big department, a small department, the idea is if you have data in your tables and you want people to be able to access it, no pun, and they don't have access, you can publish this information out to a SharePoint services site. It's like a web portal. We are here, though, to learn strictly about Access at this point in time, so I'm going to leave all these defaults intact. We're not going to use the SharePoint at this time. I'll click Create and allow Access to prepare my database. Here we are. We have a new file called Contacts. It's an Access file, and by the way, that would be a .mdb extension, Microsoft Database. We've been launched into something that looks like a table. It is, however, a form, and I can tell because this icon tells me it's a form called Contact List. This tells me it's Contact List as well. After you move through all of these nuggets, you'll be able to tell also just by looking at the icon what object we're looking at. How do I know if I'm not familiar with the icons? That's what this navigation pane is for. If I click this button, the shutter bar, open close button, I can see the objects, and it's showing me 4 objects. This is one way that you can organize your contacts, or your navigation rather. I'd prefer to see it in a more logical fashion, so I'll click this down button. I'm going to choose to organize by object type, though if I wanted to, I could look at it by just items that are related to a specific table, or I could look at this based off of dates, or I could look at all the supporting objects. I would like to look at this by object type. Now I see I have one table called Contacts. I have one query called Contacts Extended, 2 forms, contact details, and there's the contact list, the one that we have open. Here's the form icon that I was talking about. And I have 2 reports, contact address book and contact phone list. These are all the objects that I have, and of course as we move through we'll create more items. If I'd like to take a look at an object, I could simply double click it and it launches it here. I like these tabs. This is a new way to look at Access. So if I'm working on more than one item, I can flip back and forth. We have an empty table here because we're just working off of a template. Access said, hey, I think you probably are going to use this basic template, but it's up to you to add your own data in there. Not a problem. I'll just show you a couple more of these. By double clicking, I launch them. They're all empty. We already have a form open, so let's go ahead and open up a report. I've been double clicking. You can also right click and choose Open that way. We're going to talk about all these menu items as we move through this. This is a report. It's how we view our data. That's why we have page 1 of 1 here, and all of the fields listed. Again, it's an empty database, so we're not going to see a representation of data. If I'd like to close these, I can right-click and choose to close all, close one, or of course there is an X over here that I can click. I'm just going to close all of them there. I've closed everything up there. And before we take off on our whole tour, before we do that, let's create a whole new Access database, and then we'll take a tour of the interface. Right here, as you look at the screen, there's not actually a new button. You might be used to older versions of Access or other versions of Office where you had a new button right there on the toolbar. It's kind of hidden here. If you're used to keyboard commands, Control N as in new does still work. The Office button, this is new. Up in the upper left-hand corner, it looks like the Windows logo, the Office logo. You can click on that to reveal some of the most obvious tools that you use in almost any program you ever open. Here is where the New button is located. In this Office button, I see New. By the way, I also have Open, Save, Save As, Print, Close Database, Exit Access. Some of the most common items that you're probably used to seeing on the File menu and right there on that standard toolbar in Office. We want to create a new database, so I'll click on New. I'm back in this screen. It looks familiar, right? I could choose to create a file off of a new template, but instead, I'm going to create a real estate database. So I'll say real estate sample database, and I could choose to store it in a different location, but I'm happy with this. So I'll click Create, and I now have a new file called realestatesample.mdb. It launched me into this new file, and it says right up here, Real Estate Sample. And you know what is interesting about Access? It's different than Excel, any other program. You can only have one database open at a time. It automatically closed my Contacts One database and replaced it with this one right here. You only can have one open per version of Access that is launched on your computer. Look at this. I only have one table that's created here, and it has no name. It's just Table 1, table, indicating that it's the first table and it's an object type of table. Nothing in here whatsoever. Let's begin our tour. We are going to start with this item right here. It's new. It's called the ribbon. Office 2007 has a ribbon, and we're on the Data Sheet tab of the ribbon. We'll start from the left side. If I click on Home, here I've revealed my Home commands, and these are somewhat familiar. Here is your cut, copy, and paste. We have our formatting options here as well. Now these over here are Access specific, and this button right here, the View button, is extremely important, and you will be very, very familiar with this soon. Every object in Access has at least two views. You have your design view, and you have, in the case of a table, you have your data sheet view. Two views. Why is that? Because design view is where you determine what type of fields you want, what type of fields in a table or in a query, what type of fields you want to query in a form. How do you want the look of your form to be? When you're in design view, you're not looking at data, you're looking at structure. When you're in data sheet view, you're looking at the actual data. So when I click this and go to design view, it very often prompts me to save my databases. So I'm in a real estate database. I'll just call this one Homes. And now I'm in design view of my table. I see my tab is Homes. I see my table's called Homes now. This is where I'd go to determine the fields and the data types. We're going to get into this when we get into tables. The point that I want you to capture here is you are going to be bopping back and forth between views all the time. Now I know there's only two views possible, so I can just toggle with this button. Very often you'll see this architecture or draftsman type of graphic, that generally tells you you're going into design view. This looks like a data sheet. So if I had data, it would be displayed here. And we're going to get into all these access specific commands also. The create tab is where I go to create a new object. I created a new file in the Office button, but now that I'm in that file, I have to stay within it by creating all those objects. So I can create tables, forms, reports, and queries. And of course, they'll all be displayed down here once I create them. If I want, I can bring in external data. It's very common, especially if you're using Access for the first time, that you have a number of pieces of information in an Excel spreadsheet. You can pull that information into tables right here in Access, and we'll show you how. And SharePoint, we mentioned that that's a new item. You can also work with SharePoint and Access together with your data, of course. Microsoft always wants to integrate Office applications into the mix, so you can very easily use people's information in your database and generate emails regarding that. Database tools. This is a very important ribbon as well. This is where you can set up relationships among your tables, and Access can analyze your tables to make sure that they're built well. We can even link up with SQL Server, which is an enterprise-wide Microsoft product. If you find that Access just isn't large enough anymore to fill your database needs, then you can move up and use SQL Server. You can export all that information into SQL Server. Some other tools over here are items that we'll take a look at. Encryption is a way to secure your information so it's scrambled and not easily accessed by malicious users. Table Tools Data Sheet. This is another way that we can modify the structure of our table. We have relationships. Here again, it's in a couple different places. This is the Office ribbon, and the first time I started using this, it took me a while. I had to search around. I knew I wanted a specific tool. I just didn't know where it was. But once I got familiar with it, I realized that I actually like it better than the other way that the Office products had been set up, because believe it or not, it's more user-friendly and things seem to be more at my fingertips, and I have an easier, well, more of an ease of use as I'm working through this. Something else I'd like to point out about this ribbon is you can minimize it to free up some real estate around here. If you double click on it, you can minimize it out of your way. A single click will show it to you again, but notice now my information is covered up. So if I click on an item, it's going to just show it to me. When I click back out, it's minimized again. If I don't want to have that, I can right click, remove the check mark from minimize the ribbon, and now I'm back to where I started. It's good to free up more real estate, but really, I want you to be aware of this in case you accidentally double click on that. I don't know how many times I've not been paying attention and I've double clicked or single clicked or done something, and then all of a sudden my environment is different, but I didn't quite know what I did to affect it in that way. So that is how you work with the ribbon. Now we're on to the Office button. You had a general idea of this when we created a new database. I do want to point out before we get in there, you have a save button right here. Undo and redo are at your fingertips. And naturally, you could customize your quick access toolbar. Click on this button, and you could determine that you'd like to add more of the information that you typically use. Look at that. Minimize ribbon is here as well. I'm going to keep it as it is. As you know, our Office button is similar to our old File menu or standard toolbar. So we have these items that we discussed earlier. We also have print. You could print preview. I wouldn't recommend printing a table, so you don't have to preview that, but you may want to do that for your reports before you print them. You can also quick print right to your default printer, or you could select a different printer where you'd like to your pages to end up. Manage. This is where you have a few of the tools available to you. You can compact and repair a database. Compacting is the same way as the same thing as shrinking your database. After time, when you're deleting records and adding new records, it can really fragment how it's stored on your hard drive. So by compacting, it removes all that white space that eventually occurs from deleting records and creating new records that are different sizes. And repairing is the first thing to try when you try to launch a file and it doesn't open and you think you might have some corrupt data. Corrupt data is very common if you just power down your computer and don't actually close the program and turn it off the right way through the Start menu. So first thing to try when things seem weird is to repair the database. Backing up the database gives you another copy. It is for fault tolerance, so if it does become corrupt and you can't repair it, you can at least restore your backup copy. Database properties are where you can go so that you're able to actually include some metadata. It's not information that you see in the database, but if someone's looking at the properties of the file, they'll see the name of the person who created it and some date and even a description of maybe who owns the database or the database goal. We already know Microsoft likes to include all of their other applications. So you can email items from your database to people in your contact list, and you can also incorporate the people in your databases into your Outlook contact list. Publish is something that's new and interesting. If you have a document management server, you can share this database there, and it's a nice way to manage different versions of information. Your package and sign is there for security. There's a digital signature that's applied. This is a mathematical algorithm called a hash, and it verifies that when I save this file, it really was saved by me, and if I email it to someone else, or it might be a little large for that. If I save it on a network drive or FTP it to someone else, they can verify that the source really was me, Emily Berry, and that the data was not tampered with in transit. You can also close the database, as mentioned before, which will keep access open, or you can exit access all the way. Access options. Do you remember the Tools menu where options are located? That's typically the case for older versions of Office, but here it is in our Office button menu. So if I click Access Options, I have my typical settings for my database as a whole. From here, I can always go to Help, by the way. That question mark indicates help. I can go to the most popular items. Don't show screen tips. I've turned off those little descriptions that pop up as you roll your mouse over the different buttons that exist. My default file format is Access 2007, though if I wanted somebody with an older version of Access to be able to open my files, I would save it as an older version. This is for backwards compatibility. I can also change my default location. Many of you will be working off of maybe a network share, so you can change that to a different drive so other people can access your database. Now, current database, I can give my application a title if I'm creating maybe an icon that will be on people's desktops. They'll see the name of it that way. Do I want to see the status bar? I'm not going to take you through these one by one. I want you to get the overall point, which is you go to your options now. Instead of in the Tools menu, you go into your Office button and choose Access Options, and you really have quite a bit of control over what happens to your database. We also have the control over Datasheet, our default formatting look, the way the grid lines look, our font. This is all for cosmetic reasons, I'd say. Object designers, our default data type is text. You could change that. I kind of like to stick with the defaults in this because I'm used to them, but choose whatever makes sense within your workflow. These just have to do with more specific object items. Proofing, hey, we've probably all used spell check before. That's one of the best things that ever happened when word processors came out. We got to spell check and make sure that we sounded professional when we allowed other people to see the work that we were sharing. Advanced, again, these are really getting into precise ways that your database is going to behave. I've determined to show the number of recent documents as none. When you go to that Office button, it will show you the last few files you've worked on, similar to other versions of Office, which is nice. If you're often working with the very same file, you might as well let it show up in that menu so you don't have to continuously choose Open in order to get into the file that you often use. Customize, this is where I can, again, customize that little menu that appeared next to my Office button. I could just choose a item that I want to see on the left, pop it over to the right. Add-ins, you can add in some other items. Database Engine Conflict Resolver is something I added in because it's part of the installation, but you can also download items from Office to have more flexibility. Just choose the type of add-in. It's like a supplementary program. You choose what you want to add. If you've downloaded it, then you would have to locate it on whatever drive or directory where you downloaded it to on your computer. I'm going to cancel out of that. I am going to go back to this Office button though, back to Access Options. The Trust Center is where you can go to make sure that you have more security. Microsoft is really working on securing its environment. Over the years, Microsoft has caught a lot of flack about security. It's not necessarily true that they were lax on security. It may be because Microsoft products are the most popular out there, and so of course it's a plum target for malicious people that want to cause all of us problems with all the work that we do on our computers. So resources is the last one. This is really what's going to hook you up with Microsoft Online to receive more updates for security's sake, hot fixes, patches, things that can better secure your programs. There are diagnostic items available to you. Naturally, you can contact Microsoft and tell them, hey, is this a bug, perhaps an undocumented feature, or indicate to them that you're having a performance problem. Microsoft is big on licensing, so you can activate your copy of Microsoft Office, and in fact, if you don't activate it, it will turn off after a while because we don't want pirates out there in the world, and Microsoft really will litigate people if they don't follow the rules these days. You can go right to Microsoft Office Online, and of course, just like the help menu you might be used to, you could see what version of Access you're running and all of the copyright information. You could go to tech support from here as well, and look at that. Will be prosecuted. All right, Microsoft, we will obey the law. I'm going to click cancel here since I haven't actually made a choice. That is your Office button, and you'll hopefully feel comfortable with it after a while. Well, let's open a database that's already been created. Where's that command? In the Office button. I'll click the Office button. I'll select Open. From here, I have my Zoo database in the My Documents directory. By double-clicking on it, I've opened my database. Well, here is the Zoo database that I've actually created in the 2002-2003 file format, so it is backwards compatible. And tables, double-clicking on them shows me that, hey, look at that. I've got a zoo database. Animals need to eat some food, so I've got a table with 13 records here. All of my other objects are listed down here. Of course, I'm not limited to those objects. I can create more tables, queries, forms, reports. I can even create some macros and some modules, and they'll all be stored within this same file, zoo.mdb. That brings us to the end of our Access tour. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we accomplished. We created a couple new databases. We took advantage of the templates that are installed automatically when you install Access, and we also went to that new Office button and chose New. From there, we got to begin our database creation from scratch. We then opened a database that was already created, our Zoo database. And through this all, we toured the new Office interface. That ribbon is new and the Office button is new. It is a totally customizable program. Once you're in the interface, after a little while, I'm sure you'll feel very, very comfortable. It's user-friendly, and like always, everything is just a right click away. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.